You think you could just park like that and block me in? Who do you think you are, huh? No, look at me when I'm talking to you.
You heard her. Move it or there's a problem. You want to make this a problem?
No, fine, we'll settle it another...
The phone was already recording when the first hateful word cut through the afternoon air. What should have been nothing more than a routine errand, a quick stop for groceries on an unremarkable Thursday evening, was about to transform into something that would ripple across an entire nation. The asphalt of Oakwood Plaza's parking lot was about to witness a confrontation that would accumulate over 35 million views in less than 72 hours, ignite a firestorm of public outrage, and demonstrate with brutal clarity that in our modern era of omnipresent technology, bigotry carries a price tag that some people discover far too late they cannot afford. The man standing at the center of this gathering storm was named Marcus, a 36-year-old data analyst who had relocated to this quiet suburban community just 7 months prior. He drove an unassuming four-door sedan, the kind of vehicle that blends into any parking lot without drawing a second glance. His life was deliberately quiet, built around remote work, occasional dinners with friends at neighborhood restaurants, and weekend hikes in the nearby nature preserve. There was nothing about Marcus that suggested confrontation. Neighbors who would later be interviewed described him as the kind of person who waved hello from his driveway, who helped the elderly woman 2 houses down bring in her trash cans when the wind knocked them over, who always seemed to have a genuine smile, ready for anyone who crossed his path. If you find yourself drawn into stories like this, stories that reveal something important about the world we live in, I'd encourage you to stay with me until the very end. This one takes some unexpected turns, and the resolution is something you'll want to hear for yourself. That Thursday, Marcus had exactly one objective on his mind. He needed to pick up a few items for dinner and return home in time for an evening video call with his team overseas. Nothing complicated, nothing memorable. He had pulled his car into a standard parking space near the middle of the lot, double-checking, as he always did, to ensure his vehicle was properly positioned between the faded white lines. The Oakwood Plaza shopping center was moderately busy, as it typically was during the early evening hours. Families pushed shopping carts toward their minivans. An older couple walked hand in hand toward the pharmacy. A group of teenagers laughed near the entrance of the electronics store. Ordinary scenes of ordinary suburban life. Marcus entered the grocery store at approximately 5:45 in the evening. The automatic doors whooshed open, releasing a wave of air conditioning that provided relief from the lingering humidity outside. He grabbed a basket rather than a cart, another indicator of how brief he intended this trip to be. He moved through the aisles with purpose, selecting salmon fillets from the seafood counter, fresh asparagus and bell peppers from the produce section, a bag of jasmine rice, and a container of mixed berries. He paused briefly at the bakery section, considering a fresh baguette, then decided against it. 20 minutes, maybe 22. The kind of shopping trip that evaporates from memory the moment you walk out the door, but memory would not be permitted to forget what happened next. When Marcus emerged from the store, reusable bags hanging from both hands, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. He walked toward his car, his mind already shifting to the work call ahead, mentally organizing the points he wanted to raise with his overseas colleagues. He was perhaps 30 feet from his vehicle when he first noticed something was wrong. A large SUV, a dark blue behemoth that seemed to dwarf the surrounding cars, had parked so close to the driver's side of his sedan that the gap between the two vehicles couldn't have been more than 8 inches. There was no way a person of average build could slip through that space. The positioning seemed almost deliberate, as if someone had made a conscious decision to create an obstacle. Standing beside the SUV were 2 individuals, a man and a woman, both appearing to be in their late 40s or early 50s. The man was broad-shouldered, wearing a faded green polo shirt and a white baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. His arms were folded across his chest in a posture that radiated confrontation. The woman stood slightly behind him, designer sunglasses perched on her face despite the overcast sky, her expression unreadable but her body language tense. Marcus processed all of this in the space of a few seconds. His first instinct was to assume this was simply bad parking, an accident of geometry that he could work around. He would load his groceries through the passenger side, then carefully back out and go about his evening. No reason to make this into anything more than a minor inconvenience. He walked to the passenger side of his car, opened the rear door, and began placing his grocery bags on the back seat. He was arranging the items carefully, making sure the berries wouldn't get crushed, when he heard the woman's voice slice through the ambient noise of the parking lot. "You need to leave." Marcus straightened up and turned to face her. Her sunglasses reflected his own confused expression back at him. He asked her what she meant, though something in the pit of his stomach was already beginning to churn, already anticipating what might be coming. "This neighborhood," the woman continued, her voice louder now, carrying across the parking lot like she wanted an audience, "is not for people like you. We've worked hard to keep this area safe. We don't need your kind bringing trouble." The words hit Marcus like a physical force. He had experienced moments like this before, scattered throughout his life like landmines buried in otherwise peaceful terrain. The sudden shift from mundane reality to something ugly and primal. The realization that to some people his mere existence in a space they considered theirs was an offense worthy of confrontation. The man in the white cap unfolded his arms and took a step forward. "You heard her. Get in your car and leave. Go back to wherever you came from." Marcus felt his heart rate increasing, felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that comes with being targeted. But alongside that fear was something else, something that had been honed through years of navigating a world that too often viewed him with suspicion. A cold, clear-headed awareness that this moment required documentation, this moment required evidence. Without raising his voice, without making any sudden movements, Marcus reached into his pocket and retrieved his smartphone. He activated the camera, switched it to video mode, and raised it to chest level, making sure the lens captured both of their faces clearly. The red recording indicator blinked to life. "I'm recording this interaction," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his chest. "I'm standing next to my own car in a public parking lot. I have every right to be here." The effect of the camera was immediate and profound. Rather than causing the couple to retreat, it seemed to ignite something within them. The woman's face contorted with fury, visible even behind her sunglasses. She pointed a manicured finger directly at the lens. "You're threatening us. You're threatening us by recording without our permission." The man moved closer, his considerable bulk now blocking any path Marcus might have taken to reach his driver's side door. His face pushed toward the camera, features twisted with anger. "Turn that off right now. Turn it off and get out of here before you regret it." Marcus held his ground. Years of training himself to remain calm in moments of crisis served him well now. He explained in the same measured tone that he was simply trying to access his vehicle and leave. If they would step aside, he would gladly be on his way. But stepping aside was apparently not part of their plan. What happened next would become the central exhibit in a legal case that would consume months of court time and generate countless hours of media commentary. The woman reached into her purse, extracted her own phone, and dialed 3 numbers that every American knows by heart. Within seconds, she was speaking to an emergency dispatcher, and the words pouring from her mouth bore no resemblance to reality. "There's a black man in the Oakwood Plaza parking lot," she said, her voice pitched high with manufactured fear. "He's following us. He's threatening us. He's been watching us load our groceries, and now he won't leave us alone. I'm scared. I'm really scared. He's aggressive. He's very large. Please send someone quickly." Every syllable was a fabrication, every claim an invention, and every word was being captured with crystal clarity on Marcus's phone, the timestamp running in the corner of the frame like an indifferent witness to the truth. The man in the white cap seemed energized by the call. He pressed even closer to Marcus, his face now just inches from the camera lens. The words that came from his mouth were the kind that cannot be repeated in full, the kind that reach back through centuries of hatred and oppression, the kind that are designed to wound and dehumanize. Racial epithets mixed with threats of violence, promises that the police would arrive soon and deal with him appropriately. The woman finished her call and joined in the verbal assault, her voice harmonizing with her husband's in a chorus of bigotry that echoed across the parking lot. Other shoppers had begun to take notice. A young mother quickly ushered her children toward their car, shielding their eyes. An older man with a military veteran's cap slowed his pace, watching the scene unfold with a troubled expression. A cluster of teenagers near the cart return area had their phones out, though it was unclear if they were recording or simply frozen in shock. Marcus remained still. His arm holding the phone never wavered. His voice, when he spoke, maintained that same calm quality that would later cause millions of viewers to marvel at his composure. He stated again that he was simply trying to leave, that he had no interest in confrontation, that he would appreciate if they would allow him access to his vehicle. But the couple had committed to their performance. They had cast themselves as victims, and they seemed determined to play those roles until the curtain fell. Let me pause here to ask you something. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you were treated as suspicious or threatening simply because of who you are or what you look like? If this story resonates with something from your own experience, I'd be grateful if you'd share your thoughts in the comments. These conversations matter. The sound of a police siren, brief but unmistakable, announced the arrival of law enforcement approximately 8 minutes after the woman's call. A patrol car pulled into the parking lot, followed moments later by a second unit. The shifting lights cast red and blue shadows across the facades of the surrounding stores, drawing the attention of everyone within view. The transformation in the couple's demeanor was instantaneous and theatrical. The man took several steps back from Marcus, his aggressive posture melting into something that approximated innocent bewilderment. The woman rushed toward the approaching officers, her arms waving, her voice now trembling with what was meant to pass for genuine distress. "Thank God you're here," she gasped. "That man, he approached us while we were putting our groceries away. He started recording us. He wouldn't stop. He made us feel so unsafe. We didn't know what he was going to do." The first officer to reach her was a man in his early 30s, his nameplate identifying him as Officer Daniels. He had the practiced calm of someone accustomed to walking into tense situations and needing to quickly assess the truth beneath the surface. He listened to the woman's rush of words without interrupting, his eyes scanning the scene, taking in the positioning of the vehicles, the distance between the parties, the phone still clutched in Marcus's steady hand. When the woman finished her breathless account, Officer Daniels walked over to where Marcus stood beside his car. His partner, an older officer named Reyes, positioned herself near the couple, maintaining a neutral presence while observing their behavior. "Sir," Officer Daniels said, "can you tell me what happened here?" Marcus nodded. He lowered his phone slightly but did not stop recording. In a voice that had not changed register throughout the entire ordeal, he explained. He had finished shopping. He had walked to his car. He had discovered the SUV parked so close that he couldn't access his door. The couple had confronted him, told him he didn't belong in the neighborhood, made racially charged statements, blocked his access to his vehicle, and then called the police with a fabricated account of the interaction. "I have everything recorded," Marcus added, "from the moment they first spoke to me until right now." Officer Daniels asked if he could see the video. Marcus turned the phone so the screen was visible and played the recording from the beginning. For the next several minutes, the officer watched in silence. His expression shifted gradually as the footage progressed. He saw the woman's initial confrontation. He heard the words about people like him and your kind. He watched the man block Marcus's path. He listened to the emergency call, every false statement captured in damning clarity. He heard the slurs, the threats, the escalating harassment. When the video reached the present moment, Officer Daniels looked up. Something had changed behind his eyes. He reached for his radio and requested that dispatch note this was now an evidence documentation situation. Then he asked Marcus to send him a copy of the video immediately. Marcus complied, fingers moving across his phone screen with practiced efficiency. Within 30 seconds, the file was transferred to the email address Officer Daniels provided. Then the officer walked back toward the couple. What happened next would become one of the most viewed moments of the entire video. Officer Daniels informed them both that based on the evidence he had just reviewed, they were being detained on suspicion of filing a false police report. He advised them of their rights in the standard recitation that every American has heard in countless movies and television shows, but which takes on an entirely different weight when you are the one hearing it spoken directly to you. The woman's face drained of color. Whatever script she had prepared in her mind, this was not how it was supposed to end. Her mouth opened and closed several times before words emerged, and when they did, they were protests of misunderstanding, claims that she had truly felt threatened, insistences that this was all being blown out of proportion. The man in the white cap reacted differently. His face flushed red, and his voice rose to a volume that attracted the attention of everyone in the vicinity. He demanded to speak to a supervisor. He threatened legal action. He accused Marcus of somehow manipulating the video, of setting them up, of orchestrating this entire encounter. His finger jabbed toward the camera, toward Officer Daniels, toward the gathering crowd of onlookers, as if he could somehow point his way out of the consequences converging upon him. Officer Reyes had moved closer during this outburst, her hand resting near but not on her equipment belt, her presence a calm counterweight to the man's escalating agitation. Between the two officers, the situation remained controlled, but it was clear that the couple had not anticipated this outcome. They had expected the police to arrive and validate their version of events. They had expected Marcus to be the one in handcuffs. The world had different plans. It was at this moment that a young woman stepped forward from the small crowd that had gathered at a respectful distance. She appeared to be in her late teens or early 20s, with a college sweatshirt and a backpack slung over one shoulder. She addressed Officer Daniels directly, her voice clear but nervous. "I recorded part of it too," she said. "I was coming out of the store and I heard them yelling at him. I didn't know what was happening at first, but I got my phone out and I recorded probably the last 5 or 6 minutes. I can show you if it helps." The officers exchanged a glance. Officer Daniels asked her if she would be willing to share the video and provide a statement. She agreed without hesitation. Her footage, captured from a different angle, showed the same events Marcus had documented: the aggressive postures, the blocking of the car door, the emergency call, the slurs. It was independent corroboration that eliminated any possibility of the manipulation claims the man had been desperately floating. The couple, whose names would later be publicly identified as Gerald and Victoria, were placed in handcuffs and escorted to the separate patrol cars. Gerald continued his protests all the way to the vehicle, his voice carrying across the parking lot, drawing the stares of shoppers who had emerged from various stores to witness the spectacle. Victoria had gone silent, her face hidden behind her hands as if she could physically block out the reality of what was happening. Before they were driven away, Officer Daniels returned to Marcus one final time. He explained that beyond the false report charges, what Marcus had experienced could potentially qualify as harassment, intimidation, and, depending on how the district attorney chose to proceed, possibly hate crime charges as well. He asked if Marcus wished to pursue all available legal options. Marcus didn't need time to consider. He said yes. The parking lot began to empty as the patrol cars departed. The young woman who had provided the corroborating video gave Marcus her contact information before leaving, sensing that she might be needed as the legal process unfolded. A few strangers offered words of support as they passed, their faces reflecting a mixture of sympathy and discomfort. The evening was sliding toward dusk now, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple that seemed incongruous with the ugliness that had just occurred. Marcus stood alone beside his car for several minutes after everyone had left. His heart rate was finally beginning to return to normal. His hands, which had been steady throughout the confrontation, now trembled slightly as the adrenaline drained from his system. He looked at his phone at the video file that contained his evidence and made a decision that would amplify this story far beyond the boundaries of this suburban parking lot. He opened his social media application, created a new post, and uploaded the complete, unedited footage. He added a brief caption explaining what had happened, expressing the exhaustion that comes from experiencing such incidents repeatedly throughout a lifetime, and stating simply that he was sharing this because people needed to see the reality that many face every day. The post went live at 7:23 in the evening. By 10 of that night, it had accumulated 500,000 views and was spreading across multiple platforms. By midnight, major news accounts were sharing it, and the view count had surpassed 3 million. By the time the sun rose the following morning, Marcus's phone was overwhelmed with notification alerts, interview requests from journalists, and messages from complete strangers expressing solidarity, outrage, and support. The video had escaped his control. It belonged to the public now, and the public was about to render its judgment with devastating efficiency. The internet, that vast and often chaotic organism of collective attention, turned its gaze upon Gerald and Victoria with the intensity of a searchlight. Within hours of the video going viral, amateur investigators had uncovered nearly everything about their lives. Gerald owned and operated a plumbing contracting business that served the surrounding suburban communities. Victoria worked as a property manager for a commercial real estate firm. Both maintained social media profiles that they had apparently never thought to restrict or conceal. Screenshots began circulating almost immediately. past posts and comments that revealed a pattern of views that suddenly made their parking lot behavior seem less like an isolated lapse of judgment and more like the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. Commentary about certain neighborhoods, shared articles with telling editorial additions, inside jokes and references that took on darker meanings in the light of what the world had just witnessed. Gerald's business page became ground zero for the public's response. Reviews that had nothing to do with his plumbing services flooded the listing. One-star ratings accumulated by the hundred. People called his business line and left voicemails that alternated between expressions of disgust and detailed explanations of why they would never consider using his services. His email inbox overflowed with messages that crashed his server's capacity. By Friday afternoon, less than 48 hours after the incident, 4 commercial clients had issued public statements terminating their contracts with his company. One of them, a regional property management firm, specifically cited the video and the values it revealed as inconsistent with their commitment to an inclusive community. Victoria's employer was slower to respond, but the response was no less decisive. The commercial real estate firm released a carefully worded statement on Saturday morning. It expressed the company's commitment to treating all community members with dignity and respect. It noted that certain actions by employees, particularly those that generated significant public attention, could create conflicts with the company's core values and client relationships. It concluded by announcing that Victoria was no longer associated with the firm, effective immediately. Neither statement mentioned the video directly. Neither statement needed to. But the professional consequences were merely the opening act. The legal system was preparing its own response, and it would prove to be far more formal and far-reaching than anything social media could impose. On the Monday following the incident, the district attorney's office convened a review meeting. Prosecutors watched the video, read the police reports submitted by Officers Daniels and Reyes, reviewed the corroborating footage from the young bystander, and assessed the full scope of potential charges. By Monday evening, formal charges had been filed against both Gerald and Victoria. Each faced counts of filing a false emergency report, criminal harassment, and disorderly conduct. But the prosecutors added something else, something that transformed the case from a local matter into a precedent-setting legal battle. They applied the state's hate crime enhancement statute, which could substantially increase the penalties for any underlying offenses when those offenses were motivated by bias against protected characteristics. The hate crime enhancement was the critical element. Without it, Gerald and Victoria might have faced relatively minor consequences for first-time offenders. Probation, perhaps. A fine. Maybe some community service. The kind of slap on the wrist that generates eye rolls and cynicism about the justice system's commitment to addressing bias-motivated behavior. With the enhancement, everything changed. If convicted on all counts, each of them faced the possibility of significant jail time, substantial fines, and a permanent criminal record that would follow them for the rest of their lives. They were released on bail the Tuesday after their arrest, but freedom came with a price. The conditions of their release required them to surrender their passports, check in regularly with a supervising officer, and have absolutely no contact, direct or indirect, with Marcus. Their attorney, a private defense lawyer named Patterson who specialized in cases with high public visibility, immediately went to work on damage control. He issued a press statement within hours of the charges being filed. The statement was carefully crafted, acknowledging that his clients regretted any distress that had resulted from the incident while stopping short of any actual admission of wrongdoing. It characterized the situation as a misunderstanding that had been amplified beyond all reasonable proportion by the dynamics of social media outrage. The public response to Patterson's statement was immediate and savage. Social media dissected every phrase, every careful non-apology, every attempt to shift blame. How does someone misunderstand a situation when they're the ones initiating it? How does someone accidentally file a false police report? How does someone mistakenly use racial slurs? The court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. The legal system would take considerably longer. I'm curious what you're thinking at this point in the story. Do you believe genuine accountability is possible after something like this? Or is it always just damage control once you've been caught? Let me know your thoughts below. The legal proceedings that followed consumed the better part of 9 months. The pace of the justice system moves according to its own rhythm. one that often feels frustratingly slow to those who are waiting for resolution. Motions were filed, hearings were scheduled, attorneys met behind closed doors to discuss possibilities and strategies that would never become public record. Gerald and Victoria initially entered pleas of not guilty, apparently maintaining some hope that they could challenge the charges despite the overwhelming video evidence. Their attorney Patterson attempted a series of legal maneuvers designed to undermine the prosecution's case. His first significant motion sought to exclude the video evidence entirely. The argument was creative, if ultimately unsuccessful. Patterson claimed that Marcus had recorded the interaction without informing his clients that they were being filmed, which he characterized as a violation of their privacy expectations. He cited wiretapping statutes and consent requirements that he suggested should apply. The judge, a veteran of the bench named Catherine Wallace, who had presided over complex cases for more than 2 decades, was unmoved. She noted that the state operated under single-party consent laws for recordings, meaning that Marcus, as a participant in the conversation, had every legal right to record it. She further observed that the interaction occurred in a public parking lot, a space where courts had consistently held that individuals have no reasonable expectation of privacy. The motion was denied. Patterson's second major strategy targeted the hate crime enhancement. He brought in legal scholars and language experts to argue that while his client's words were admittedly offensive, they did not rise to the level of bias-motivated conduct that the statute was designed to address. This was simply a heated exchange between strangers, he contended, not a targeted attack based on protected characteristics. The prosecution responded by calling their own expert witnesses. Historians and social scientists took the stand to explain the historical context and ongoing impact of the specific language that had been used. They traced the lineage of certain slurs, demonstrated their connection to systematic oppression, and articulated the harm that such language inflicts on its targets and on society more broadly. Judge Wallace allowed both sides to make their arguments in full, but her subsequent rulings suggested she was not persuaded by the defense's characterization. As the trial date approached, with jury selection scheduled to begin in 3 weeks, the prosecution extended an offer. If Gerald and Victoria would plead guilty to the harassment and false report charges, the state would agree to drop the hate crime enhancement. They would face probation, community service, financial penalties, and mandatory counseling, but likely no actual imprisonment given their lack of prior criminal records. It was a generous offer under the circumstances. Many legal observers said so at the time. Gerald wanted to reject it. According to sources close to the defense team, he remained convinced that if the case went to trial, a jury of his peers would see things differently than social media had. He believed he could win. Victoria took the opposite view. She understood what a trial would mean. That video would be played in open court, probably multiple times, analyzed frame by attorneys and experts. Her face and her words would be displayed for the jury, for whatever media were present, for the public record that would exist forever. Even if by some miracle they were acquitted, the trial itself would be another wave of exposure, another cycle of public judgment. Patterson reportedly spent considerable time convincing Gerald that trial was a catastrophic idea. The evidence was not merely strong, it was irrefutable. The video had been forensically authenticated. There were no gaps, no cuts, no possibility of the manipulation Gerald had initially alleged. A jury trial would be a gamble with odds so unfavorable that any reasonable assessment approached certainty of loss. And if they lost at trial, the penalties would be substantially harsher than what the plea deal offered. Finally, after what sources described as hours of tense discussion, Gerald relented. On a Tuesday morning in early spring, 9 months after the parking lot incident, Gerald and Victoria stood before Judge Wallace and entered guilty pleas to charges of harassment and filing a false emergency report. The disorderly conduct charges were dismissed as part of the negotiated agreement. The hate crime enhancement was removed from consideration. Judge Wallace accepted the pleas, but she made it abundantly clear during the sentencing phase that she was not entirely satisfied with the resolution. Speaking for the record, her voice carrying the weight of more than 2 decades of judicial experience, she characterized the behavior captured on that video as reprehensible and dangerous. She noted that false reports to emergency services waste critical resources, put innocent people at risk of violent confrontation with armed officers, and erode the foundation of community trust upon which public safety depends. Gerald was sentenced to 30 months of supervised probation, 350 hours of community service, a fine of $6,000, and mandatory participation in a certified bias education and intervention program. Victoria received the same terms, though her community service requirement was set at 280 hours. Both were issued a no-contact order regarding Marcus that would remain in effect for 6 years. Any violation would result in immediate incarceration, but Judge Wallace was not finished. She imposed an additional requirement that would become the subject of considerable public discussion. As a condition of their community service, both Gerald and Victoria were ordered to develop and deliver educational presentations at local schools, community centers, and civic organizations. These presentations would address the consequences of racial bias and the dangers of false emergency reports. They would stand before audiences and explain what they had done, why it was wrong, and what they had learned from the experience. Imagine that requirement for a moment, being compelled to revisit your worst moment, not once but repeatedly, before rooms full of strangers. Having to articulate your failures and attempt to convince skeptical audiences that you have genuinely changed. The sentence was designed not merely to punish, but to transform, or at least to test whether transformation was possible. The legal consequences were substantial, but they were only one dimension of the reckoning that Gerald and Victoria faced. The social and economic consequences, running in parallel, would prove equally, if not more devastating, to the lives they had known. Gerald's plumbing business never recovered. The initial wave of negative attention had driven away clients and contractors alike. Even after the news cycle moved on to other outrages, the damage had been permanently encoded into the digital record. Anyone searching his company name encountered the video, the news articles, the avalanche of negative reviews. Potential customers found other plumbers. Subcontractors declined to work with him. The reputation he had built over years of work was destroyed in days. Within 14 months of the parking lot incident, Gerald was forced to close the business entirely. The assets were sold to pay outstanding debts. The employees, most of whom had nothing to do with their employer's behavior, found themselves job hunting in a difficult market. Gerald eventually found employment with another contractor, working in a subordinate capacity for a fraction of the income he had once earned as a business owner. Victoria's situation was no better. No property management firm or real estate agency would consider hiring her. Her face was too recognizable, her name too thoroughly associated with what had happened. She attempted to work as an independent contractor, but clients would not return her calls once they looked her up online. After months of unsuccessful attempts to rebuild her career in real estate, she abandoned the industry altogether. She found work doing administrative tasks for a small manufacturing company, a position with no public-facing responsibilities where she could work in relative anonymity. Their personal lives fragmented under the pressure. Friends who had once been close stopped returning calls, either out of genuine disgust or simple self-preservation, not wanting to be associated with pariahs. Extended family members gave interviews to media outlets expressing shock and shame, claiming they had never realized the depth of Gerald and Victoria's views. The couple's own relationship, subjected to immense stress from every direction, reportedly deteriorated significantly, though they remained legally married. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself navigating a reality that had been fundamentally altered by 30 minutes in a parking lot. His life, which had been deliberately quiet and unremarkable, was now anything but. The video's spread brought opportunities he had never sought and never imagined. Civil rights organizations invited him to speak at conferences and events. A national advocacy group asked him to join their advisory board. Media outlets from local news to national platforms requested exclusive interviews. Marcus became, without intending it, a public figure. He handled this unexpected visibility with the same composure he had demonstrated in the parking lot. When he agreed to interviews, he steered conversations away from personal grievances and toward systemic issues. He spoke about the broader patterns that made incidents like his possible. He emphasized that he was, in an important sense, fortunate. He had possessed a smartphone with sufficient battery life to record. He had encountered officers who were willing to review evidence before making assumptions. He had witnesses who corroborated his account. He had access to legal resources that allowed him to pursue the case to its conclusion. Others facing similar situations, Marcus noted repeatedly, were not so lucky, and some of them had paid far higher prices. He also filed a civil lawsuit against Gerald and Victoria, seeking damages for emotional distress, defamation, and the violation of his civil rights. That case moved through the legal system on its own timeline, eventually settling out of court for an amount that was never publicly disclosed. According to people close to Marcus, much of the settlement was donated to organizations that provide support for victims of racial harassment and bias-motivated violence. The young woman who had recorded the corroborating footage discovered that her small act of bystander intervention had given her a platform she had not anticipated. She used it to launch a social media campaign encouraging others to film and speak up when they witnessed injustice. The campaign resonated particularly with younger audiences and accumulated a significant following. She was invited to speak at schools about the responsibilities and risks of being an active bystander in a society where a single moment captured on video can change everything. The police department incorporated the incident into its training curriculum. Officers were shown the video as an example of how quickly situations can be misrepresented, how persuasive false accusers can be, and how critical it is to gather evidence before making judgments. Officers Daniels and Reyes were commended by their department for their handling of the situation, for their willingness to take a witness's video seriously, and for their refusal to let initial narratives override documented facts. The Oakwood Plaza Shopping Center undertook its own response. Additional security cameras were installed throughout the parking lot. Security staff received new training on how to identify and respond to harassment incidents on the property. The center's management, aware that their location had become nationally associated with an ugly incident, made visible efforts to demonstrate their commitment to customer safety for all. The ripples continued outward, touching institutions and conversations far beyond one suburban parking lot. Now, I want to ask you something as we approach the conclusion of this story. Type the word accountability in the comments if you believe people should face real consequences for this kind of behavior. Your engagement helps more people see stories like this one. Whether Gerald and Victoria truly changed as human beings remains an open question, one that perhaps only they can answer with certainty. According to people who attended their mandatory educational presentations, the couple's evolution was uneven and slow. The early sessions felt wooden and rehearsed. Gerald and Victoria stood before audiences and recited what they were required to say, but the words seemed disconnected from genuine understanding. They were going through the motions, satisfying the letter of their sentences without embracing the spirit. Over time, observers noted something appeared to shift, at least for Victoria. Her presentations became less scripted. She began speaking more honestly about her upbringing, about the assumptions she had never been required to examine, about the shock of seeing herself through the eyes of millions of strangers who found her behavior repugnant. Whether this represented authentic transformation or simply better performance was impossible to determine from the outside, but the change was noted by those who witnessed it. Gerald's journey seemed less complete. Those who heard his presentations reported that he focused heavily on the consequences he had endured, the business lost, the friendship severed, the reputation destroyed. At times, according to these observers, his narrative seemed to position himself as a victim of disproportionate punishment, rather than someone who had faced appropriate accountability for his own choices. He talked about what had been done to him more than what he had done. But perhaps this is the nature of such proceedings. Perhaps complete internal transformation is too much to expect from court-ordered presentations. Perhaps the real value of the sentence lay not in changing Gerald and Victoria, but in the message their visible consequences sent to everyone who watched. The video continued its life beyond the immediate case. Universities incorporated it into sociology and criminal justice courses. Corporate diversity training programs used it as a case study. Police academies showed it to recruits as an illustration of false reporting and implicit bias. Thousands upon thousands of people who would never meet Marcus, Gerald, or Victoria nonetheless absorbed the lesson encoded in that footage. The lesson was this: in an age of ubiquitous recording technology, your worst moment can become your permanent public identity. Using law enforcement as a weapon against people of color can result in criminal charges. Racism, beyond being morally wrong, can be personally and professionally catastrophic. The calculations have changed. The stakes are different now. The case also contributed to broader legal discussions about false emergency reports, particularly those that weaponize police response against black individuals. Several states began considering or strengthening legislation specifically targeting racially motivated false reports. Legal scholars pointed to cases like this one as evidence that the justice system, while imperfect, was capable of responding appropriately when the evidence was clear and the will to prosecute was present. 3 years after the incident, Marcus agreed to one final interview about the experience. The journalist asked him a question that had been asked of him many times in different forms. Did he believe justice had been served? His answer was careful and considered, characteristic of the thoughtfulness he had displayed throughout the entire ordeal. Justice for him personally? Perhaps. Gerald and Victoria had faced legal consequences, professional destruction, and ongoing obligations that would mark them for years. The system had, in his particular case, functioned more or less as it was supposed to. But justice in the broader sense, that, Marcus said, required far more than any single case or verdict could provide. It required systemic change, the kind that doesn't happen in courtrooms but in classrooms and living rooms and the countless daily interactions that shape how people see each other. It required cultural shifts that would take generations to complete. It required ongoing commitment, not to punishment, but to the actual equality that punishment was meant to protect. He also said something else that lodged in the minds of many who heard it. The saddest part of the experience, Marcus reflected, was not what had happened to him in that parking lot. He had survived worse over the course of his life. He was still here. He was still standing. The saddest part was the certainty that his experience was not unique. Somewhere on that very same day, someone else was being harassed, threatened, or falsely reported to police. Maybe they didn't have a phone with them. Maybe no bystanders were present. Maybe the officers who responded didn't bother to ask for evidence. Maybe the consequences fell on the wrong person entirely. His story had a resolution. Millions of others did not. That perspective reframes everything we've just witnessed. This was never simply a story about two people who made racist statements and faced consequences. It was a window into a problem that extends far beyond any single parking lot or any single video. The fact that this incident became exceptional, became nationally discussed, became a case study, is itself evidence that such accountability remains rare rather than routine. The story of what happened at Oakwood Plaza is ultimately about documentation and its power. It is about what happens when truth exists in a form that cannot be denied or reinterpreted. It is about ordinary people who, armed with nothing more sophisticated than a smartphone, become accidental witnesses to injustice. It is about a legal system that, at least sometimes, delivers consequences that match the conduct. And it is about the recognition that actions, particularly hateful ones, can generate ripples that extend far beyond the moment in which they occur. Gerald and Victoria walked into that parking lot believing they could confront someone with impunity. They believed their words would dissipate into the afternoon air, leaving no trace. They believed that their version of events would be accepted without question. They believed they could wield the police as a personal weapon and face no consequences for the abuse. They were wrong on every count. Their brief expression of hatred cost them their careers and financial stability. It cost them friendships and family respect. It cost them years of their lives dedicated to probation requirements and mandatory presentations. It cost them the ability to walk through their community without being recognized and judged. It cost them, and continues to cost them, in ways that the official sentence only partially captures. Was it enough? That question has no universal answer. Some believe the penalties were too lenient, that behavior motivated by racial hatred deserves far harsher punishment than probation and community service. They point to the original hate crime enhancement, dropped in the plea deal, and see a system that still treats such offenses too lightly. Others believe the social consequences, the public shaming that will never fully fade, the careers that will never fully recover, the permanent stain on their names searchable by anyone with internet access represent punishment that in some ways exceeded what the legal system could have imposed. The modern era has created mechanisms of accountability that operate outside courtrooms entirely, but nearly everyone who engaged with this story agreed on one fundamental point. Marcus deserved better. He deserved to purchase groceries and return to his car without interrogation. He deserved to exist in his neighborhood without being told he did not belong. He deserved the basic dignity and respect that should be the birthright of every human being. The fact that he had to fight for these things, that he had to document his own harassment, navigate a legal system, endure months of proceedings, and relive the trauma repeatedly in interviews and testimonies, reveals how much work remains. That work is not completed by one viral video or one successful prosecution. It is not completed by any single story, no matter how widely it spreads or how satisfying its resolution. It is ongoing. It requires participation from all of us, in our own communities, in our own daily choices, in our willingness to speak up when we witness injustice, and to examine our own assumptions when we realize they need examination. So there it is. A routine evening errand that became a national conversation about bigotry, accountability, evidence, and justice. A parking lot confrontation that demonstrated both how much has changed and how far we still have to go. If you stayed with this story to the end, thank you for investing your time. Stories like this one matter because they make visible the experiences that too many people still face. If you found value in this telling, please consider subscribing so you don't miss similar deep explorations of the cases that shape our understanding of fairness and accountability. And I'd genuinely like to know what you think. Should the consequences have been different? Was the outcome truly just? What would you have done in Marcus's position? The comments are open. This conversation continues with your voice.